Thank you all for joining us today for this training on public benefits and income maximization. Before we get started, I just want to say who LegalHealth is. So Simone, if you want to go to the next slide. So we're a division of NYLAG, and we provide free legal assistance and develop policy to help New Yorkers with serious and chronic health issues and who are experiencing financial hardship. We bring together legal and medical professionals in the healthcare setting, complementing healthcare with legal care. And we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. And we are, again, a division of NYLAG, which is the New York Legal Assistance Group. And it's a leading nonprofit that provides free civil legal services, financial counseling, and engages in policy advocacy efforts to help people experiencing poverty. All right, next slide. So income as a social determinant of health. Income obviously affects patients' health. There have been numerous studies that have linked poverty to higher levels of cancer and cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and other chronic conditions. And obviously increased income can help low-income individuals afford medication and necessary out-of-pocket expenses. And the role, right, of an advocate is to make sure that patients don't leave any money on the table. So you can use the law as a tool. There are often legal remedies available to assist patients with obtaining, maintaining, and increasing important benefits, both on a federal, state, and city level. The law can also help patients navigate employment and can lead to assistance with income while the patient is unemployed, more job security, and address debtor creditor issues. Next slide, please. So what we're going to be doing today, we're going to talk about the different benefits that are available and how to access those benefits. Those include Social Security, benefits through HRA, and we're going to talk about how to appeal an adverse decision or an action through a fair hearing. We're also going to provide a very basic understanding of employment issues and debtor creditor concerns, touching specifically on leave protections from your workplace. And we're going to give you some tools you can use as an advocate to assist patients with increasing or stabilizing their income. And we're going to discuss how we can work together as a team on behalf of vulnerable patients. All right, so the benefits that are available, we're going to do an overall benefits for low-income populations. Next slide. So this is a list of benefits that are available to individuals. It's pretty extensive. Social Security Disability, SSI, SNAP, aka food stamps, HEAP, family assistance, HASA, safety net assistance, and then veterans benefits, both service-connected disability and VA pension for non-service-connected disability. And we're not going to talk in depth about veterans benefits just because that could be a whole training in and of itself. Each of these items could be a whole training in and of themselves, but we wanted to put that on there because there is the potential for significant benefits if the person is in fact a veteran. Next slide, please. And here are some COVID-related specific benefits. There's the Excluded Workers Fund, which is unfortunately no longer accepting applications, but this was for individuals who are undocumented, who were left out of financial assistance programs last year. There's the COVID ERAP application, and this is for rent arrears. Unfortunately, it seems like funding has been committed at this point to pending applicants, but individuals can still ask their landlords to submit the landlord rental assistance program application, and there's funding there for that. And then we have HRA or FEMA burial assistance for COVID-related deaths. And then there's also a link for assistance with damage caused by Hurricane Ida. All right, so these are the common Social Security benefits that we see. There's Supplemental Security Income, SSI, and then there's Social Security Disability Benefits, SSD. So SSI provides benefits for low-income, elderly, or disabled individuals with insufficient or no work history. We're going to talk about what that means in a couple slides. And then you'll see here that the monthly benefits for an individual living alone and an individual living with others. This is for 2021. In 2022, there will be a 5% increase. So those numbers will go up. And then for Social Security disability benefits, these are benefits that are paid from the patient's own Social Security retirement account when they become disabled with a work history. And that that amount can range anywhere from $100 up to $3,000, depending on the patient's work history. And just to note, when Social Security disability monthly benefits are less than the $881 for supplemental Social Security income, the individual can receive both Social Security disability and SSI. Next slide, please. And then these are some other common Social Security related benefits. There's retirement, survivor's benefits, and auxiliary benefits for a family of a worker receiving Social Security disability. For the retirement, you must be at least 62 years old and have accumulated a minimum of 40 quarters working. Legal permanent residents, individuals with green cards who have 40 quarters may receive. Unfortunately, millions of undocumented workers will end up having to pay into this system and won't receive the benefits when they go to retire. Survivor's benefits are available if the worker is deceased. The survivor must be documented. There's a one-time payment of $255, and the monthly benefit does depend on the person's work history. And then if there's an individual who's receiving SSD, their minor or disabled children or dependent elderly spouse can also receive a monthly benefit as well. Thank you. Next slide. All right, so for both SSI and SSD, the individual needs to be determined disabled according to the rule, the definition with Social Security. And there are some factors that go into determining disability, which include whether the person can work, whether they can do the same work as they did before the disability, whether they can do other types of work, and there's a duration requirement which has to be met, and that is the disability has to or is expected to last 1 year or longer and result in death. All right, so that's for adults. For children, the analysis is different, but there's still that duration requirement where the disability has or is expected to last at least 1 year or result in death. So for infants and toddlers, they're evaluated in areas of growth and development and achieving major milestones. And for school-aged children, they're evaluated in the areas of academic performance, behavioral issues, and physical limitations. Next slide, please. So both of those programs do have restrictions for individuals with certain immigration statuses. So depending on the immigrant status, entry date, and years that they have been in the US, they may be eligible for Social Security benefits. For SSD, they have to have a green card, so be a legal permanent resident, and have a sufficient on the books work history. For SSI, the person may be eligible if they're a qualified alien and lawfully residing in the US on August 22, 1996 and receiving SSI and or are blind or disabled. So it's the further we get away from 1996, that's a smaller category. Or the green card holder with 40 qualifying quarters of work, but they are not eligible for SSI for the first 5 years as a green card holder. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a case scenario one. So we're going to go through and see what Juan may be eligible for. So Juan is 61 years old and he suffers from type 2 diabetes. He has a green card and has had one for 20 years, and he's worked for 15 years as a plumber. He has been a patient at your hospital for many years, and recently his condition has deteriorated, leading to chronic heart failure. With this new diagnosis, he's no longer able to work, and he tells you that he's having trouble paying his bills, and his savings are almost gone. So what is Juan eligible for? And if you could go ahead and select what you think. The options are Social Security Income, SSI, Social Security Disability, SSD, SSI or SSD, and Social Security Retirement. So we're going to give just a few seconds if you can go ahead and select which one. All right. Great. So the majority of you said SSI, SSD, and we're going to go ahead and talk about what that looks like. Okay. So first analysis, you want to look at their immigration status. Is the patient one of the following: a US citizen or a green card holder issued before August 22nd, 1996, or has worked 10 years in the US with a green card, or has asylee parolee status? Yes. Then is the patient currently unemployed or working but earning less than a substantial gainful activity level, SGA, of $1,310 per month? That's the figure for 2021. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look and see Juan's eligibility. So from the case scenario, we know that he's worked for more than 10 years. So he has the sufficient work history while he's had his green card. So he's eligible for Social Security, Disability, and SSI. But when we'll see in the later slide, he won't receive SSI because his payout's going to be higher than the $881 that is paid out by Social Security income. So if he had less than 40 work credits, he could not apply for either SSD because he doesn't have a sufficient work history, or SSI because he's not a citizen. So it's important to remember both the work credit requirement for Social Security Disability and the immigration status requirement. So what next? So Juan can apply for Social Security Disability, and what you can do as an advocate is help him create an online account at this link provided, and the slides will be sent around after the presentation, to determine his eligibility and to check to make sure that his work history is correct. He can also submit an application. He can start an application for disability online. To apply for Social Security income, SSI, individuals do need to call to have their application started over the phone. Offices are still closed, but you can find the local field office number at that link. And if they are having issues getting in touch with their local office, they can also call the 1-800 main national number as well. All right, next slide. So some things that you can do to help strengthen his application, because unfortunately 65% of initial applications are in fact denied. And some things that you can do to help strengthen are to help one create a complete detailed narrative on their application, help them collect medical records from treating providers, both old and current. And most applications are actually denied because they don't have sufficient medical records. So getting all of the medical documentation is really key to help with the application process. And if the officer determines that the medical evidence on its own is not sufficient to make a determination, they will ask the applicant to undergo a consultant exam where they'll be assessed by a Social Security medical provider. You can also encourage patient compliance with treatment and appointments, and have the healthcare provider complete what's called a functional capacity questionnaire. Another thing that's really important is to have the patient discuss with their medical provider, with their treating doctor, that they plan to apply for disability, so that those the doctor can include more detailed notes in the medical records when they do have appointments, linking the medical condition with their inability to work. So having the conversation with the medical provider is also helpful. All right, next slide, please. All right, so if approved, they do face a 5-month wait period before they're eligible to receive their benefits. So there's a 5-month wait period. SSD recipients can also start receiving Medicare starting 29 months after the date of the disability onset. This is not after the date of Social Security disability approval, it's the date of the disability onset. And they do have an obligation to inform Social Security of any income received. The ability to earn income may affect future benefits. So if someone is thinking about returning to work, they should know that if they begin working above the SGA level, if they begin receiving income above $1,310, they'll then start a process by which Social Security will begin to determine whether they are continuing to be disabled. So it's important that they know that if they work above that level, they can trigger that process. Most unearned income won't affect eligibility, but it should be reported nonetheless. Next slide, please. All right, so SSI. So recipients of SSI also receive Medicaid, and SSI is a resource means tested benefit. And so there is a resource level that they cannot exceed, and that's $2,000 for an individual, $3,000 for a couple. A recipient of SSI has the obligation to report any earned and unearned income, and that will have a dollar-for-dollar reduction in benefits. It's important for the patient to know as well that if they're currently receiving HRA public assistance, they'll likely lose those benefits, and any back pay from SSI will in fact be recouped by HRA. So you can avoid a confusion of someone coming into the office and saying, you know, my benefits were discontinued, I don't understand what's going on. If they know ahead of time and have that knowledge that their cash assistance, their public assistance will end, and any back pay will be given to HRA, will be recouped by HRA. All right, next slide, please. All right, if the patient's application is denied, there's some steps that they can do and should do to appeal that decision. So 62% of claimants who appeal their denials win their hearings. And again, if you remember, it was like 65% of initial applications are denied. And then 62% of claimants do end up winning at the appeal level. In order to appeal, the person has 60 days from the date that they, from the date on the notice, the date they received the notice. And they can appeal by going online to file what's called a request for reconsideration. They cannot go to the local office because the local office is closed. They could also mail the request to reconsideration to their local office. If they decide to do that, they should send it via certified mail so that they have proof of mailing and proof of receipt by Social Security. They should also be referred over to a legal services provider for investigation on the merits of the appeal. Appeals do take about approximately 6 to 18 months to be heard. And our office does have DAP funding to help represent disabled patients at that level. All right. Next slide, thanks. So we're going to talk about public benefits next. So moving away from Social Security and talking about food assistance programs, cash assistance programs, and shelter assistance programs. Next slide, please. All right, so food assistance programs. Common one is SNAP, which is also known as food stamps. And SNAP is a program that provides food assistance for low-income New Yorkers, including families, the elderly, and the disabled. To apply for SNAP, the person can apply online, call the info line, the HRA info line, or pick up an application at SNAP centers. They are reopened across the city. They can also submit an application using the Access HRA app. And then just so you know, there are increases in SNAP payments starting this month. So for a household of one, it's been increased from $194 to $250. And we provided a link for other size households there. And next slide, please. And just so you know, assistance with food other than SNAP, we wanted to give you this information. So there's the emergency food line that you can call to get information about other food programs around New York City. And then Public Health Solutions is available in almost all HHC hospitals, and they can help with SNAP enrollment and the information there on contacting them is on the slide. Next slide, please. So moving away from food assistance programs, there's public assistance, which provides cash and shelter allowance to individuals. There are two types of programs in New York. There's family assistance, AKA TANF, AKA welfare. And this is assistance to eligible families that include a minor child living with a parent or a caretaker relative. And then there's safety net assistance, which is available to individuals who are not eligible for family assistance, so single adults and some qualified immigrants. They can apply for both of these programs the same way that one would apply for SNAP, except they would need to go to a job center if they were to go in person. So again, that's online or via the Access HRA app. And then we wanted to put also a link for help with child support, which is beyond the scope of this training. All right, this slide is delving into it is kind of beyond the scope of this training, but just so you know, the number of households, and then the standard of needs, so you can see what the maximum shelter allowance and maximum grant will be. So there's a lot of information on that slide. You can peruse it at your leisure. Next slide, please. So for those individuals who are receiving full public assistance, they should also be receiving assistance with their rent. And this is known as a shelter allowance. So for a family of one, they can receive $250 a month in rental assistance. This number is extremely low and hasn't been updated and hasn't been increased in many years. It's quite pitiful. The two programs that are available to individuals are FEPS and City FEPS, which is administered by HRA, and individuals can inquire at their local home base or with their shelter caseworker if they believe that they're eligible for assistance. The one thing that I will note about FEPS and City FEPS is that pre-COVID, an individual did have to be in housing court prior to being assessed by home base, but that requirement has been waived for right now, and a person only needs to show proof of rent owed, so proof of rent arrears, in order to have an appointment with home base to see if they're eligible for either of those programs. All right, next slide, please. So for both programs, both SNAP and public assistance, cash assistance, there is an immigration component again. So the individual must have a green card for at least 5 years before they're eligible. This can be shorter if it's a child or they are disabled. However, households with citizen children should apply even if the head of household is undocumented, without fear of public charge, which we'll talk about in a few slides. The same is for same rule applies for public assistance. For green card holders and other qualified immigrants, such as SIDG minors, refugees, and asylees may be eligible. And again, households with citizen children should apply even if the head of household is undocumented. They should apply even if undocumented. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the Home Energy Assistance Program, HEAP, this is a program that helps low-income individuals pay for the cost of heating their homes. The benefit period opened October 1st, and a person can be eligible and receive one regular HEAP benefit, and if there's an emergency, they can receive a second HEAP benefit. It's important to note HEAP doesn't cover other utilities not related to heating. It only covers heating utilities. Undocumented tenants alone are not eligible, but they should apply for their eligible household members, again, like a US citizen child. And you can find more information about how to apply at OTDA's website there. Next slide, please. All right, and just briefly, HASA, which is a sub-agency of HRA that provides financial assistance and case management services to individuals and their families who are living with HIV, even if those viral loads are undetectable. To apply, the person must go in person and you cannot complete the application online. HASA is generally more generous with rental assistance and is less strict about how the housing voucher should be used. So it's a good resource for individuals that qualify. If you need to communicate with HASA about a client, you will need to have a HIPAA signed by the client. All right, so those are an overview of the benefits. We're going to talk about, the next few slides are about the public charge rule, both as it existed prior to the Trump administration and the Trump administration's efforts to try and expand it and change it. All right, so just briefly, a public charge rule has existed for years and it's still in existence. In 2019, the Trump administration did try to expand the public charge rule to disqualify more immigrants, but that was struck down in March of 2021. So it has been invalidated. It's no longer has any effect. The types of benefits that were to be included federal Medicaid with some exceptions, SNAP, aka food stamps, Section 8, and public housing. And as we have seen, those programs already have immigration eligibility restrictions already. So the public charge rule as attempted to be changed by the Trump administration was really just it was a fear tactic and really just created a chilling effect on people's ability to access benefits. So next slide, please. All right, so this is the test as it stands. It's subjective, but if an individual is determined likely to become a public charge, they may be denied a green card through a family member or denied entry into the US. And the benefits that are considered are very limited. So it's federal benefits used for institutionalization for long-term care, including federal Medicaid, and cash assistance from any source. So that's TANF, that's public assistance, SSI, and state and local assistance. So again, those are two limited categories that from which benefits are considered. And we're going to go ahead and look a little bit deeper about who it is, who it applies to. So next slide, please. So who is subject to the public charge rule? All right, so this applies to individuals, to immigrants who are trying to adjust their status, who are trying to become legal permanent residents, who are green card applicants. Through sponsorship by a family member or employer, or they're trying to adjust their status through the diversity visa lottery system. It also applies to individuals who are looking to enter the US from abroad on a non-immigrant visa. This includes a visitor visa or a student visa. And it also applies to individuals who are in the US currently on a non-immigrant visa, who are looking to try and extend their visa for whatever reason, or are trying to change their status from, let's say, a visitor visa to a student visa. So it's a very limited category of individuals who are subject to the public charge rule. The list on the right, all of the people who it does not apply to. So current green card holders, those are individuals who already are lawful permanent residents, including those applying for naturalization, and humanitarian statuses, including asylees, refugees, UNT visas, VAWA recipients, Violence Against Women Act recipients, SID recipients, and TPS holders, temporary protected status. Those are all of the individuals that it does not apply to. All right, next slide, please. And the benefits that are subject or that are looked at under the public charge rule. The healthcare benefits include federally funded Medicaid used for institutionalization for long-term care. Federally funded Medicaid used for institutionalization for long-term care, such as a nursing home or residential medical facility. So we see it's extremely narrow, that the healthcare benefit that is considered. All right, all of these other benefits on the right-hand side are not included. Medicaid, unless federal Medicaid for, again, institutionalization for long-term care, state-funded Medicaid, which is PRUCAL, ACA subsidized health insurance, the essential plan, charity care, ADAP, testing, treatment, and prevention of COVID-19, Medicare, and short-term rehabilitation. So that whole list, all of those benefits are not considered under the public charge rule. Next slide, please. The other benefits that are not healthcare related benefits that are subject to the public charge rule include cash assistance for income maintenance. So this is your SSI, this is your TANF, your public assistance, your state and local cash assistance, such as family and safety net assistance, as we saw on the previous slides. All of the other ones are not included. SNAP, Section 8, WIC, National School Meal Programs, Head Start, disaster relief, all of those on the right-hand side, those are not included in the analysis. All right, next slide, please. So the key messages for patients, what you need to impart on your patients. They should seek the care they need without fear. All right, the healthcare benefits continue to be safe under the current public charge rule. The only exception, say it with me, is long-term institutionalized care under federal Medicaid. It's very narrow. Patients with questions should be referred for legal advice. Patients should not disenroll from benefits without consulting a reputable immigration specialist. Very important, the last one, benefits received by family members are not counted. So again, this is the undocumented head of household who applies on behalf of their US citizen child. The benefits received by the child have no bearing, no application on the person's immigration status and their future ability to adjust their status. All right, so those are the key messages for patients who are who you may encounter, who may still have concerns given the last few years under the Trump administration. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that someone's doing that in the chat. Thank you so much. All right, so the summary of success for Juan. With your great advocacy and help, Juan submitted a strong application for SSD, and he will start to receive $950 a month soon. So again, he won't be eligible for SSI because his monthly benefit is too high. And it's important to emphasize soon. Remember, there's the 5 months wait period. All right. And while he was waiting for his application to be processed, you helped Juan apply for other benefits. He started receiving SNAP, cash assistance, shelter allowance, and a HEAP grant to help with his heating bill. Important if you talk with Juan to, again, just emphasize that the cash assistance and shelter allowance may be discontinued since he started receiving, oh no, I'm sorry, that was for SSI. Ignore that. Since it's SSD, it's not counted. Juan is now able to buy his monthly bills without worrying and can afford to buy healthy food. His doctor has seen a noticeable difference in Juan's stress level and blood pressure. So again, we see the connection between legal health and physical, mental, emotional health. So all with your great advocacy. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the next section we're going to talk about is fair hearings. All right, next slide, please.
I think we have a poll.
Oh, poll, please. All right. So here's a poll for all of you. If you've assisted with a fair hearing, what type of fair hearing have you assisted with us? And you can select all that apply, no wrong answers. Give it a few seconds, and then we'll go ahead and see. All right, so the majority of you haven't assisted with a fair hearing. You're in the right place then to learn about how to help advocate. Great, so what is a fair hearing? It's the formal means for a patient to challenge actions or inactions by HRA regarding benefits that they received. And generally, a person will receive a notice from a city agency explaining why their benefits are being discontinued or reduced, but these notices are typically very difficult to discern. COVID-19 has affected how fair hearings are requested and prepared for and conducted. So many of the requirements for benefits have been lessened or waived altogether. Next slide, please. Some of the common reasons why a patient would ask for a fair hearing include the application for benefits or services has been denied. Benefits for services have been discontinued, cut off, or reduced. The benefits are incorrectly calculated, budgeted. Person disagrees with employability or needs a work exemption. This is not applicable during COVID, during the public health emergency. This is not a requirement. Inadequate home care hours and shelter placement denial. So all of these are reasons why someone may request a fair hearing. All right, next slide, please. When should a patient ask for a fair hearing? As soon as possible. There are time limits for filing. So as soon as the person receives a notice that they disagree with or their benefits have changed without a notice, they should apply. They should file a fair hearing request. For Medicaid and public assistance, it's 60 days. For SNAP, it's 90 days. for aid to continue, which is the request that their benefits remain unchanged during the pendency of the fair hearing. That's 10 days, and home care hours are 10 days. There's a request if the patient is homebound, they can request a hearing for the increased hours 45 days after the fair hearing is requested. So next case scenario is Janet. Janet is an undocumented mom who has a US citizen child, and they receive SNAP in the amount of $250 a month. However, she went to the store recently and was told that the account had a zero balance, and she was unable to buy food for her child. Janet states it's the second of the month and she should have the full $250 and is confused and cannot buy food. She thinks it might be cut off because she is undocumented. And I think that we have another poll. Yes. What can you ask Janet to provide you when you assist with SNAP? So what can you ask her to give you? Ask for any papers she has received from HRA in the last 3 months. Ask if she has applied for a fair hearing, and if she has not, help her apply for a fair hearing. Help her gather proof of income documents, or all of the above. So if you can take a minute to respond. Great. All of the above, correct, great. You're doing a good job. All right, so how can you help Janet ask for a fair hearing? She can request online, by mail, or by fax. There's a form on OTDA's website, and she should get a confirmation of the request and should print that out for her records. In order to make the request, you will need to have the below information. So name, address, case number, contact information, and all of those, all that information is generally on the notice. If there's not a notice, that will be indicated, you'll have an opportunity to indicate that on the fair hearing request. And again, if there's not a notice, then the person will need to request the fair hearing as soon as they notice that their benefits have changed. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so once she's requested a fair hearing, she'll receive an acknowledgement notice and should keep a copy. When you request the fair hearing, you should request aid to continue as well if it's within the 10 days. If she is not eligible for aid to continue or is not given it, then we can do some advocacy and see if she can have that. Our understanding right now is that cases with aid to continue, so those requests that benefits remain unchanged during the pendency of the fair hearing, those are not actually being scheduled for a fair hearing right now. If your patient's concerned about how long they've been waiting or has questions about their specific case, then of course we can go ahead and review the case. You can refer them to a legal service provider. And if referred over, the legal service provider will request an evidence packet that will explain HRA's conclusions and how it came to them. So all of that happens after the request for the fair hearing is submitted. All right, next slide, please. What happens at the fair hearing? All fair hearings right now due to COVID are being conducted by telephone. So what happens is the person is scheduled for a 9 to 1 p.m. slot or a 1 to 5 p.m. slot. They need to be available for that entire time. They also are going to receive the number from a blocked number, so their phone does need to have the ability to accept block calls. A representative is not required for these. It can be helpful if there's a complicated legal issue, depending on the complexity of the case. Before the fair hearing begins, it can usually be conferenced with HRA and be resolved using that informal means of advocacy. But if not, then what happens is the administrative law judge, the ALJ, will explain how the hearing works, will ask questions, and figure out what issues will be discussed. And both HRA and the patient will have the opportunity to present their side of each issue. They can give testimony and provide documents, present witnesses who can be examined and cross-examined. So all of that happens telephonically now due to COVID. Next slide, please. And what happens after the fair hearing? So a written decision will be issued. And if it's favorable, then the city has 30 days to comply. If the decision is not favorable, the patient can file Article 78 proceeding in New York Supreme Court. Before they do that, they need to be referred over to a lawyer to discuss taking that step. All right, next slide. So summary of success. With your help, Janet submitted a fair hearing request online and was able to secure aid continuing and have SNAP while waiting for the hearing. Good job. Janet and an advocate participated in a hearing over the phone, and she collected the documents necessary, was able to explain her case. She received the fair hearing decision yesterday and her benefits have been restored. Just briefly going back to the case scenario, when she came to you and she said that she's worried it was cut off because she's undocumented, it's important at that stage to quell the fears, because that would not be the issue. She was receiving the $250, which was the SNAP allotment for one household member, since she was the head of household undocumented and her daughter was receiving the benefit. So, all right, great. Next slide, please. All right, so we covered the benefits, we covered the fair hearing. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about employment protections. So next slide, please. All right, so highlight of protections for workers with health issues. There's sick leave, which is New York State and New York City. There's job protections that apply when someone is sick or taking care of or bonding with a family member. And those are the Federal Family Medical Leave, FMLA, and the family leave law in New York State. And then in addition to those protections, there's protections that people have against discrimination and retaliation. And those are the Federal American with Disabilities law and New York State, New York City human rights laws. Next slide, please. All right, there's a lot of information on this slide, but just generally, so you know, when an employee needs time to rest, heal, or care for others, there's two laws that apply, New York City and New York State paid sick leave law. The employer is required to provide paid sick leave if they have 5 or more employees, up to 40 hours per year. If there's less than 5 employees, they need to provide unpaid sick leave. And it's accrued at a rate of 1 hour per 30 minutes. Sick time can also be used for safe time. So this is to address non-medical needs, such as if you're the victim of domestic violence or a sexual offense or stalking. New York City domestic workers, not with an agency, must also receive paid sick leave. And an employer's policies can, of course, be more generous, but cannot be less generous. Next slide, please. All right, so those, the previous slide applied, so you're sick, and what happens if you continue to remain sick, continue to be unable to work? So in New York State, employers are required to have short-term disability, which offers 50% of weekly income up to $170 a week for 26 weeks. And then employers, that doesn't apply to government workers. So and additionally, the employer can also offer a long-term disability benefit that protects an employer from a long-term disability, but that's not required under New York State. New York State's only required to provide short-term disability. Next slide. So these are some jobs. So the job protections, the New York State Paid Family Leave Act, which was passed during COVID. This law guarantees time to take off to bond with a new child, care for an ill family member, or address certain military needs. This is not something you would use if you were sick yourself. This is limited. So it extends to full or part-time employees, regardless of immigration or citizenship status. The leave is up to 12 weeks. There's the right to return to the job and the insurance will continue. And you're eligible to start receiving it 6 months after start date, or 175 days if working less than 20 hours a week. All right, next slide. So then you have the federal law, which is not paid leave. It is a job protection. This is FMLA, protects the job of an employee who needs to take time off up to 12 weeks. It's not paid. Health insurance must continue during FMLA time. You have to have worked a certain number of hours within the last year. You can take this intermittently. And unlike state paid family leave, this does apply to yourself. It doesn't just apply to you taking care of someone else. But again, this is not paid leave. Okay, next slide. And then there's protections based on discrimination, the ADA and the New York City human rights law. The ADA ensures that employers with 15 employees do not discriminate, and the employer must provide reasonable accommodation so that the employee can provide the essential functions of the job as long as it's not an undue hardship on the employer. The ADA's definition of disability is more strict than New York City human rights law. So the ADA definition, a person who has physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. And for New York City human rights law, it has an expanded definition of disability, which includes past or present mental or physical mental impairment that substantially limits or has limited one or more major life activities. And the New York City law covers employers who have 4+ employees. Next slide, please. I'm actually going to skip over this slide. It's talking about employment insurance, which is actually something that we don't handle. If someone has questions about unemployment, they can go online to the labor.gov site. And again, we don't handle unemployment insurance matters. Next slide, please. All right, so protections for undocumented individuals. While undocumented workers should be protected under these laws, they should speak with an immigration and employment attorney to fully understand their rights. Government agencies cannot report immigration status to immigration or ICE, and for extra precautions, they can do the below, but again, they should be referred over to an immigration or employment attorney to discuss their situation. Next slide, please. All right, case study. So Frank is a 44-year-old who recently had a stroke. He was admitted to the hospital for a week and was discharged under the care of his wife, Lita. Lita brought Frank in for his first follow-up visit and stated she was afraid she would be fired from her job for taking off so much time from work. Frank has been working for the past 5 years as a security guard at a small company of about 20 people, but is thinking of quitting because he has mobility issues due to his stroke. What job protections does Frank and his family have? If you could go ahead and complete the poll. Check all that apply: paid sick leave, short-term disability, long-term disability, ADA, Americans with Disability Act. Okay, give it a couple more minutes. Okay, let's see what folks say. All right, so paid sick leave, short-term disability, long-term disability, ADA. Right, so we're gonna go ahead and look at the options on the next slide. So, correct, he does have the option of the paid sick leave, which is 40 hours. If his condition continues, he can apply for short-term disability through his employer. Again, employers are required to have short-term disability. And if they are having issues with their employer stating that they don't have insurance, they should be referred over or assisted in the process because they are they're eligible to apply. FMLA can take off up to 12 weeks and have a job to return to. And then the ADA will protect him if he needs to request a reasonable accommodation for on the job to perform the essential functions of his job. All right. Okay. And options for Lita, she can take up to 40 hours of paid sick leave to care for her husband. Employees can use paid time to care for a family member under the paid family leave law. And if she has worked the requisite number of hours, she can take 12 weeks off under FMLA, and her health insurance must continue at that time. All right, next. And if Frank quits because he's permanently disabled, he can apply for Social Security disability, as we discussed earlier, and eventually receive Medicare. While he waits, he can have COBRA, which is usually prohibitively expensive, but it is an option for him. And next slide. So the role of an advocate, your role is to refer the individual to an attorney. Individuals who are employed should not make decisions about quitting without first consulting an attorney to see what protections they're actually eligible for, and or what protections are available. We don't handle workers' comp cases. And if Frank chooses to take leave from work or explore income options, you can also help him collect necessary medical paperwork for his employer, because there's always paperwork to be collected. All right, we have a few more slides. I'm just going to breeze through these. So you can't talk about income without talking about debt. Debt can negatively affect health. That's an obvious statement. And so individuals who are experiencing when debt is piling up are some things to consider. What is a patient's current source of income? Can financial counseling help? What can patients do to stop creditor harassment? And should the patient consider bankruptcy? All right, so just briefly, protections from creditors. Certain income are collection proof. And if all of the patient's income and resources are collection proof, then they can request the collector stop contacting them in certain ways. Next slide. Financial counseling can be helpful to help prioritize bill payments and when to send collection proof letters. We do have a financial counseling unit at NYLAG and the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs also has one. And then the collection of debts. So a patient must be served with a court notice that forces the patient to pay off the debt. They need to go to court. Otherwise, they'll go ahead and lose the case, and then the creditor can garnish the property. You should refer the patient to an attorney. Declaring bankruptcy may resolve the problem, but it's a last resort, and there are clearer offices throughout the city for consumer debt problems. Great. And now we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Hannah. That was amazing. So much information, but you did it really well just because it can be a bit dry, but I felt like it was really great. Thank you so much. There were so many amazing questions in the Q&A. So if folks have not looked at them, please take a moment to do so. I just go ahead and put questions you have right now in there, and we can give answers verbally as well. But some really good questions are just basics, like 40 quarters for Social Security is 10 years. You know, what is a qualified alien? Again, please sign up for the next training on immigration, which is going to be really excellent on November 10th. That is in the chat. There's also in the chat right now a brief survey, which helps us know what we could do in the future to give you more information. I put in the Q&A a lot of links to WNYLC websites, which give breakdowns of how benefits are affected by certain types of income, right? So It depends on the benefit, it depends on the asset. And what Hannah and I do frequently is look at someone's benefits and assets and see if they are eligible for a trust, which is important if a person makes a certain amount of money over the Medicaid limits or has benefits they would like to keep after receiving some lump sum assets. So please check that out. And again, a lot of questions about how Social Security impacts benefits. So it's important to look at the slides that we provided that had like the list of, standard of income to see if you've got 4 people in the house, but 1 person has Social Security, that's not enough income for 5 people. So please look at those slides. We have a question, which is which benefits need to be recertified and what times? Go ahead, Hannah, if you want to answer that, totally up to you. I can do so as well.
Sorry, Simone, if you could answer it. Thank you.
Sure. So which benefits need to be recertified? It's a really good question because during COVID, right, we've had kind of a lax certification period, and I think we're getting back into it and people are going to be losing benefits a little bit more quickly. And so please keep track of any patients that you hear, my SNAP card isn't working, my Medicaid, my home health aid isn't coming anymore, because during COVID, certification was kind of on hold. But generally, most certifications are every year, it's yearly. I don't know of a lot that are every 6 months, but there can be interim certifications as well. That's like NYCHA has a lot of like, have you lost your job? Please fill out this interim recertification. But just keep in mind that COVID is going to impact it. COVID ending, which it's not, is going to impact certification periods. Hannah, anything other than that?
And for Medicaid, I believe Medicaid cases with recertification periods up through December of this year have been or will be automatically recertified for 2022. So someone doesn't need to do anything with their Medicaid.
And then there's a great question about financial literacy workshops. Yeah. So I think our office does a lot of them. I know Katie Crumper did one recently for social workers at Montefiore. I can try to send a link to those to Harmony and Amy and Tess so that they can send it out after this presentation to see if there's any financial literacy workshops, because it's very important that low-income individuals, receive the kind of things that they need to know about finances. How do we assist young people with disabilities apply for SSI? Great question. We have 36 sites, hospital sites in the city. So if you have a patient who's young and their, peds doctor would like the child to receive SSI, young adult people, we have specific clinics for these, and I have put in the chat, but I will again, our website where you can see all of our sites, and their parent or they can contact the social work department, ask them, make an appointment to see us so that we can help them see what the barrier is. Sometimes the barrier is getting, like Hannah said, getting the medical records correctly, getting a residual functioning capacity assessment. Sometimes Social Security just kind of processes it really quickly and just denies it because they're saying, well, you haven't had SSI your whole childhood, so why suddenly do you have it? So really good question. Lots of great DAP programs, disability advocacy project programs in New York City. So please seek us out at your site, your hospital site. I'm not sure, Hannah, if you have anything to add to that. Great, yes, financial literacy is a really great resource. So we will definitely follow up with that. So I'm going to read the questions. In a health setting, we've experienced patients declining referrals to financial counseling and benefits due to time constraints, absolutely, or feeling overwhelmed. Do you have advice for helping with patient engagement with programs and services you've outlined today? Yeah, great point. And I think that we can certainly, like Harmony said, try to send out resources for financial literacy and for counseling programs, because really in particular, we have a program that at NYLAG, which is a mobile bus that goes around the city and tries to engage with people where they are, and so that they don't have to make an appointment, they don't have to, kind of like with the vaccination effort. And we're trying to ramp up those services again, which is why we put ourselves in a healthcare setting so that they don't have to worry about finding me on Wall Street or Hannah, you know, at our houses. They can find us in the hospital. So I think if you have, you know, you could, my best advice, and Hannah can add to this, is try to refer them to one of us, and we can give them a direct link to our financial counseling site here at NYLAG.
Mhm, mhm.
There are a lot of resources will be sent out after this. I think in the presentation itself has a lot of links, and those links will be sent with the presentation. But if there's something in specific, always reach out to Harmony or Amy or Tess to see if there's a specific reference topic that you would like to see. Again,
right,
there's the registration for part 3. Go ahead.
I think we have time for one more question if someone wants to chime in. Otherwise, thank you all for joining. Again, I shared an evaluation poll on your screen. We would love if you could fill that out. There is also an open feedback form where you could provide more details as to what you found helpful with the training, and other recommendations for improving the training or other topics. And then the last thing I shared in the chat box was the link to the last part of this 3-part training series on immigration as a social determinant of health. Simona or Hannah, do you have any final comments?
No, thank you so much for joining. I hope you all have a good rest of
Thank you, as always, for allowing us to talk to this large, wonderful platform of people with such great questions.
All right, so we'll give 1 minute back to everyone. Thank you all for joining, and hope you have a nice day.
Great job, Hannah.
Thanks. I wasn't sure if we needed to stay on.
I think we're good.
Okay, see you. Bye.
Thanks, Harmony.
Thanks.
Bye.